Hello and welcome to Cyrus Forum. My name is Mariam Memarsadeghi, and we are gathered today with esteemed journalists on the anniversary of the killing of Mahsa Amini and the woman life freedom revolution in Iran. Nazenin Ansari, Mehdi Parpanchi, Nahayat Tizhoosh, and Nassim Khadem are panelists. I will introduce all of them, and then we will hear from each for about 5 minutes. I'll ask a couple follow-up questions, and then we're all together going to have an open discussion. Just as a quick background, over the last year, these four highly experienced journalists have been covering closely in different ways the protests inside Iran. Over 4,000 protests inside the country, countless strikes in really every sector of the economy, countless individual acts of civil disobedience, and a diaspora that is mobilized in unprecedented manner across the globe. At the same time, a very deep crackdown, over 6,000 killed, more than 20,000 imprisoned, systematic torture, including of children, that has been documented by Amnesty International, and the serial poisoning of thousands of schoolgirls throughout the country. The questions to this panel, I will read quickly here. One is about global coverage and how global coverage has been effective in exposing the regime's abuses of human rights, how it has helped to provide protection and greater resilience for Iranian activists inside the country. If the reporting on Iran, and particularly during the last year, has been impactful for educating global audiences. How have these four journalists here today in particular helped to make that bridge between inside Iran, Persian language, what's inside the prisons, what's happening on the streets with the activists, and how global media is covering? How has Persian language social media influenced their work? What opportunities and risks do they see in this space? When covering Iran's opposition, how do they maintain journalistic integrity, neutrality, balance in their reporting? And what advice do they have for citizen journalists inside Iran? How can those people, those courageous activists, best reach journalists outside the country with their eyewitness videos and written observations? So a warm welcome to our panelists. I will do a very short introduction because everyone here has a lot of experience. Nazenin Ansari is publisher and editor of Kayhan London and Kayhan Life. She has many, many years of experience in different media. She's a trustee of the Persian Educational Foundation and the Foreign Press Association in London. And of course, speaks to the media, both English language media and Persian language media. Mehdi Parpanchi is director of news at Iran International TV. He has been serving in this capacity for almost 4 years. Prior to this, he was service director for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the Radio Farda, a service for 2 years. And prior to that, over 15 years with BBC Persian. Nahayat Tizhoosh has been with Canadian Broadcast Corporation for over 10 years as a producer. She has been covering the protests closely, again, has been that bridge to the English language world, and she conducted a really historic, in my view, interview with Toumaj Salehi, musician, a rapper inside the country, who really led, has been leading so courageously and was out on the streets with the people. And he was imprisoned and tortured brutally. Nassim Khadem has been a journalist for over 20 years. She's a producer with the Australian Broadcast Corporation, and her written journalism over the last year in particular has really focused on the opposition and how the opposition is evolving. Um, so let us begin with Nazenin Ansari. We're all ears for your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Mariam Jun, for inviting all of us, and it's a pleasure to be on the same platform as Mr. Parpanchi, Nahayat Tizhoosh, and Nassim Khadem. I'm a big fan of all of you, as you know. Um, Regarding global coverage, obviously, what we saw last year with the Massa uprising was that global coverage actually protected the protesters on the street, and it also raised the consciousness and got into the consciousness of the Iranian diaspora, so that it was the first time that we saw. I mean, we have been covering. Kayhan London has been covering, Iran news since 1984 in London, opposition news, and we had never seen such outpouring of sentiments and also support for what is happening inside Iran from the younger generation of Iranians outside the diaspora, second, third generation. And simply because many of them get their messages from, non-Farsi speaking media. And what we saw in, for example, France, where all the deputies got up and were clapping and supporting the girls and the women of Iran. That was historically unprecedented. The fiery speeches in the European Parliament, in Germany, that was unprecedented. So definitely global, I mean, the coverage outside um, inspired those inside. And all these years that I've been covering human rights cases, from 1999 student uprising till now, one thing that they all tell me, whether they're in prison or out on the streets, is that we want our name to be known outside, and for them to know that we are here, and for them that will give us hope and inspiration to continue. So in 2019, for example, when the internet shut down, it was under the cover of internet shutdown that over 1,500 were killed. So as far as the top stories that we cover, certainly we have both the Farsi language, Kayhan London, and then the Kayhan Life. And the stories that we are covering are the stories that affect daily lives of Iranians, specifically the economy, how the economic situation is getting more miserable. As you may know, for example, the misery index for the total of Iran has gone, like 60%. And so we have covered, for example, in particular, economic quality of life and women employment, and the statistics coming out of that is abominable. That although there are, for example, 80,000 more women working in the workforce above the age of 15, their participation is 14%, whereas the men's participation is over 60%. And carries on. Another story was the school poisonings, as you had mentioned, 7,000 girls being poisoned in a very short period of time. And it took the regime 3 months to reply. And the first arrest they made was that of a journalist. They are very adept at, going and arresting activists or people on social media. But when it came to atrocities inside, it took them 3 months, and after 7,000 poisonings. And we still don't know. The opaque nature of the system inside really doesn't give us the glance. Obviously, we follow all the agency news, but the statistics coming from Iran is not to be trusted. Now, as far as Persian language media and specifically the social media, without a doubt, it has played a crucial role in not only uh, allowing the young Iranians at home uh, to find their new identity, the identity that is thousands of years old. As many of when the Islamic Revolution happened, there was a cultural revolution for 2 years. They closed down universities, and the press became very, very tight. Although there were a lot of newspapers, the amount of newspapers increased, but access to media was denied to a whole section of the population, specifically those who had worked in media and communication before the revolution. So this social media broke this monopoly of access to information and allowed citizens in Iran to find their own history rather than the history that started from 1979. As far as journalistic neutrality, when you're a journalist and when you're having a newspaper, there are different divisions. For example, there's one sector has to do with news coverage. Then there's another one opinion. Then there's another one analysis. So there are all these differentiations. But one thing we had done in Kayhan London from the beginning, we had a section. We still have a section, which was inspired by Hyde Park Speakers Corner. For those of you, who are not familiar with the Hyde Park Speakers Corner, that's the first place my parents took me and my sister and brother when we first visited London, where anyone can go and just put up a box, go on the box, and say whatever they want. So we call it Tribuna Azad. So all groups will send us their notices and articles, and as long as they abide by our standards, which is respect, which is balance, which is relevance, we will publish it. And finally, what advice do I have for citizen journalists in Iran? Number one, I mean, everywhere, is they play an very important role in advocate for democracy, because in this day and age, correct information is very crucial in our lives in making decisions. And I think it would be helpful for those who send us videos or something. One thing I tell always my colleagues: cut out the adjectives, the use of adjectives, and just instead explain, provide as much information as you can. And so and remember that Article 19 and press freedom you have the right not only to seek but to also impart information. Thank you, Mariam.
Thank you. They have the right in principle, but not in reality if they live inside the country. Um, how has social media, in your view, been not helpful? How have you seen social media be destructive to the democratic opposition forming a united vision? How have you seen social media be destructive to the safety and security of people inside the country? What's your impressions on the negative side?
Well, we should not disregard the fact that the Islamic Republic has spent billions on their cyber army. And at the same time, other groups that are, the face of opposition outside of Iran has changed. Whereas before you had the traditional groups that they're still functioning, organized. We've got a whole new generation of new groups that have been inspired by Massaw Revolution and also by their newly arrivals, and they're forming their groups. But also at the same time, we've got influencers. Around this time, I think the best way the Islamic Republic could use social media is to create divisions. But it's and also fake news, disinformation. These all go hand in hand. Whereas before internet in the beginning was very easy to access, now it's becoming more difficult because of AI algorithms, the information, even like social media, Instagram, that is so read. And it's also important to, differentiate between the different audiences, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the toxicity that we had seen in the past year. It was all, in my humble opinion, um, 80% of it was organized. And they knew their objective. The Islamic Republic is always good at, and that's how they have stayed for
Okay.
over 40 years,
Yeah.
divide and rule.
Yeah.
So that has been the toxicity of it.
Okay.
But I think we have become more mature in differentiating who's really, who has a plan and who does not.
Well, I hope so. I mean, unfortunately, it seems like a lot of known activists, not anonymous, not cyber army, have taken the bait of the regime, and they didn't seem to need much help from the regime to pursue a line of division
Yeah,
and attacks.
that's true. You see, I think, we also have to take into consideration these youngsters. I mean, when I'm saying youngsters,
They're
younger
not
than
all
me.
young. They're not all young.
I know, younger than me. Okay. They have grown up in a system that, normal dialogue and conversation was not prevalent. It was always by order, always shouting, always trying to break someone to make yourself feel better. So this is, I think, this past year has really thrown the spotlight on this disrespectful behavior. You can make your point, but you don't need to kill someone, kill their character, and just forget what is the end goal. That in a democracy where you want the society you want to live in, start with it now, rather than say, okay, I will kill everyone, I will, use bad language, but then afterwards I'll be fine. No, it starts with us today, right now.
Great. Yeah. If you believe in truth and democracy, then practice it. Mr. Parpanchi, we're all ears.
Thank you so much. Many thanks, Mariam Jan, for having me, and also thanks to Cyrus Forum for having basically this discussion. More or less everything that I wanted to say, Nazenin Jan has already mentioned it, so I will probably try to summarize it and also add a couple of points if I may. And in answering your first question regarding how the global coverage has been effective in exposing the regime's abuses of human rights, I think the most important part is providing a platform for the Iranian activists and also human rights defenders to share their views and their stories and experiences with the global audience. And through this reporting, media have also helped human rights organizations, NGOs, and also government bodies to document the regime's, the Islamic Republic's human rights abuses in detail, and this is very important part of it. Although we don't report it for that purpose, but it happens. I mean, I have been contacted by a lot of NGOs, human rights organizations, and also sometimes through even UN regarding our reporting, asking for the documents that we had. One of them happened recently, only a couple of days ago. So this is also very important in documenting all those abuses and everything, and also educating the public, the people around the world, to know about the situation in Iran and what is happening inside the country. It also helps the activists inside Iran to protect them. Because when you are talking about, you mentioned the interview that Nahayat did with what was the name of the singer? Sorry,
Tumaj
Salehi, right? Tumaj Salehi. I mean, this kind of interviews, of course, it helps those people. They are already known for the Iranian people, but making them known for the global audience again gives them kind of a protection, because the regime, the Islamic Republic, cannot target them with impunity. It is very important. We all remember there were, I mean, 10, if not thousands, I wouldn't exaggerate, but hundreds of celebrities during the, I mean, last year, like in October, November, we had celebrities who were posting about what was happening inside Iran. Some of them had millions of followers, and this gave the global audience, they became known, the activists, the people who were basically fighting inside Iran were known for the global audience. And that, again, like I said, it raises the awareness of their work and the risks that they face and protect them, because then the regime cannot target them with impunity. And one other important thing is basically building a community of support for the Iranian activists outside the country, and holding the regime accountable for its abuses, of course. Your third question, I think it was about the neutrality, how journalists try to, I mean, to balance our reporting. I think when it comes to something like women rights, I mean, women life freedom movement, what was happening last year in the country, we journalists, although being balanced and neutral in reporting is important, but I would give you some examples. When you are talking about women's rights, for instance, or you are talking about LGBTQ rights, or you are talking about climate change, for instance, most media will not invite from a climate denier to balance their reporting, or they will not invite Taliban, I don't know, Sheikh or Alam al-Huda, for instance, to balance their report about women's rights, or they won't invite a gay basher only to balance their reporting about LGBTQ rights, because these are, I think, accepted facts. There is no dispute. You don't need to make your reporting neutral, if you like. So when it comes to suppressing people, protesters in the streets, unarmed civilian protesters, and then on the other side, you have a regime which is armed to teeth, and they are killing with no mercy, basically, in just broad light, killing people, making them blind. I don't think we need to be careful about being neutral or bringing the regime's point of view, because I think it is totally, I would say, irrelevant, to be honest. What is important is just to be careful about facts. Nazanin mentioned something very important. I mean, fake news, that's toxic. We have to be extremely careful not to fall for the tricks that the regime have already plays all the time. So facts and figures are very important. We need to stick to it and make sure that our reporting is absolutely correct. But I'm not worried about being neutral, to be honest with you, because I think being neutral in cases like this, like I said, I think in the international media, it is accepted that when it comes to climate change, for instance, you don't need to be neutral. It is already given, or women's rights. This is the same. When you are reporting about suppression in a dictatorship, you don't need to be neutral, in my opinion. And advice to citizen journalists, again, Nazanin mentioned it all, but what I would say is that no report worth your life. So protect yourselves. That's the most important thing. Your safety is first and foremost. So they need to be careful and protect their identity, use VPN, try to protect your IPs, and don't use, be careful not to be known, because that's the most important thing. And also, they need to be aware of the risks associated with sharing information online. Anything that when you are reporting, you need to be careful that the details that you are giving will not give away your identity. Using encrypted message apps, messaging apps, chat apps, and communicating with journalists, and contacting with news organizations directly and offering them basically to share the information, I think are the most important parts of it. But like I said, they need to be careful about themselves first and then share the information. Excellent. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. My question to you is, I've been observing, particularly after the beginning of the revolution. So after the first few months after the killing of Mahsa Amini, Iran International was being watched a lot. I think it's fair to say that it's very ubiquitous. And in fact, a recent public opinion poll conducted by Gammon indicates that it's the most popular television station for Iranians. Around, maybe midway through the year or even before that, there seemed to be a very strong campaign, coordinated perhaps by the regime. We won't know. We won't know, at least as long as the regime exists, to discredit the channel, to discredit the outlet, and to make all kinds of accusations, at the very least to create a lot of noise about Iran International. How has your media company chosen to respond?
By continuing doing what we were doing. We tried not to be, I don't know, the connection is still okay or not, because I can't, I hope you are hearing me, right?
Yes, we hear.
Mariam, you do, okay.
Hi. Yes.
Sorry, because I can't see you guys, so I thought maybe the connection is, yeah, we continued doing what we were doing, trying not to be impacted by whatever was told about us. I think, generally speaking, when you have an impact, then you are a target as well. They come together and you have to accept it. And we continued. I think, again, what we have done, we may not be the best judge about what we have done. You should know better, but we did not change at all. Despite all the pressure, all the real threats that we faced in London, everybody should know that we had to cease our operation in London because of imminent and real threats that the counterterrorism police basically advised us to stop our operation in London, and we did it. But we did not fall off her even 1 second. We immediately brought all our operation to DC. Yes, it was difficult. The quality, I know that was not exactly the same, especially in the early days. We had to do extremely long shifts. Some of my colleagues were doing like 15, 16 hours, crazy hours really, to be able to keep the channel on air. So for the first maybe 2-3 weeks, quality, I have to accept that dropped. But then immediately we tried to bring back our standards and continue doing what we were doing. Right now, in terms of the quality, I think, and also quantity. Quality is subjective, but quantity, the number of hours, the live hours that we are doing right now is much more than what we were doing last year this time. So we try to continue what we are doing, no matter, the Iranian regime we can easily ignore it. But even the opposition, not known figures, but anyway, those who were kind of, you could say that they are supporters of, let's say, this opposition campaign or that group, were attacking us. What it did not have, it had zero impact on our reporting about even that opposition group that were attacking us. We have continued covering them fair and square.
Okay, and if you feel that the criticism that you receive in a particular instance, for example, a particular interview or a particular story is warranted, or if there is a mistake made in your reporting, how do you address that?
Everybody makes mistakes, of course. I won't say that we never made mistake, but the attacks that we were receiving was mostly because we were covering all opposition groups. Because I think you will agree with me that 90% of the attacks that we were receiving was because why we have interviewed this person or why we have covered that event by an opposition group, and it was across the platform. We were attacked. We were accused of being monarchists, for instance, because we have given a lot of coverage to Prince Reza Pahlavi, or we have been attacked because we gave coverage to, let's say, Kurdish dissidents or leaders, or because we've been covering MKO gatherings, for instance. But what we have done is that we have always tried to cover all opposition groups, not giving them the same weight, of course, because you try to give airtime to every significant strand of thought based on the support or the constituency that they have among public opinion. We may have mistakes sometimes, but we were never afraid or we never shied away from continuing covering one faction because of the attacks that we have received from the other side.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Nassim Khadem. She's in Australia and it's very late for her. Nassim, we eagerly await your comments. I think you're muted. Sorry.
Can you hear me? Great. Thank you so much, Mariam. Yes, it's coming up to 2 a.m. here, so if I don't sound like I'm making sense, you know why. I'll just tell you a little bit about my background, because I was born in Iran, but I was pretty young when we left post the 1979 revolution. We came to Australia soon after the revolution. My parents are both from minority religions, so it obviously was not going to bode well for me to be raised in an Islamic republic. Dad somehow had the foresight to know that and get out of there before things got really bad. And so I've sort of grown up kind of hearing a lot about Iran and reading a lot about Iran, but never actually kind of having been there. And also always throughout my life having this real understanding that I'm so lucky to be in this country, you know, where we have freedom and where people are denied that in Iran. So I've sort of come to this story, particularly in the past year. I mean, I've reported on Iran throughout my career here and there, but I'm primarily a business and economics reporter. And I sort of came to this story you know, when Mahsa Amini's death in custody happened 1 year ago, you know, understanding that this was a big seismic shift in the way Iran was being reported and being viewed. And so it's always been hard to sort of get interest in stories about the Middle East in Australia, let alone about Iran. I mean, for a long time, people didn't even know, what is Iran? Are you Arabs? You know, what language do you speak? You know, so I think people are now, they know the story of Iran. They know about the women's movement in Iran. They know about people's, calls for freedom, and they know that this is a dictatorial regime that the people don't want. And so my part in reporting that story, I'd say there's three kind of main themes that have run across my reporting. The first is obviously the human rights abuses, and speaking to the people who bear the brunt of that, whether it be people who are awaiting execution or who are in Iranian jails. It's very obviously hard to speak to the families of these people and speak to people inside Iran. I found that enormously difficult. So, you know, what I've been tending to do is talk to, if they've got family members in Australia, for example, one of the protesters who was executed, Majid Kazemi, his cousin was in Sydney, and I spoke to him after the event. Unfortunately, the Australian government couldn't save him. And, you know, just these really quite awful stories of human rights abuses, but from the people or from the families connected in the diaspora. Another major theme has been the Islamic Republic has operatives in Australia. This is a very big story here. I think you have similar things in the US, Canada, but it's become quite a massive story here that media generally are covering about Iranian Australians who are being targeted by the regime. Yeah. So watch this space. There'll be more to come. Obviously, again, these are really hard stories to tell because a lot of these people also still have family in Iran and are very scared to speak out because of the effect that it might have on their families. And then finally, the third theme, which you kind of touched on at the start, Mariam, is that is the opposition movement, particularly outside Iran, because you can't speak to the people in Iran. They're locked up mostly in Iranian prisons, you know, all the academics and journalists and intellectuals that could be future leaders are locked up. So speaking to the people who are in the diaspora, who are calling for a secular democracy and are trying to support a transition towards a secular democracy, be that Masih El-Nejad, Nazanin Boniadi, or Reza Pahlavi. It's been really interesting to sort of tell this story, well, to bring this story to the ABC. I remember when I had the interview with Reza Pahlavi, I mean, people they just didn't know who he was, you know, and I sort of had to explain he's the son of the exiled Crown Prince of Iran. And I remember the interview I did with him went for about 30 minutes. We cut that down to 6 minutes for the World Today program, which runs nationally across Australia. And then I wanted to cut that down again for Instagram because I thought it would be a piece that it would do really well on social media. And I remember taking the story to a really young producer and saying, you know, you should put this interview I've done with this guy you know nothing about up on Instagram. This will do well. And they were like, who is this guy? And this is 2 minutes, Nassim, and they're supposed to be 90 seconds. And why is it 2 minutes? But that video alone had 1.3 million shares. And that's before people, it's one of our highest rating across the ABC ever. And that's before people even dubbed it and shared other links and other versions of it. So it showed to me there is a lot of interest in this space, particularly obviously amongst the diaspora who shared it, but also among the viewers of the ABC. In terms of maintaining journalistic neutrality and balanced reporting, it's been a real struggle because at the ABC, you know, we are a national broadcaster and we do have to give a right reply to whoever we sort of write about. I mean, when I kind of started writing, I would go to the embassy here and ask for comments. I've got to a point where I'm pretty sure they're going to ignore my request for comment anyway. So it's been a real battle because, you know, if I'm writing a story about someone who's been tortured by the Islamic Republic or whose family members just been executed, and what am I going to go to them and say, please give me a right of reply, and what are they going to say, right? They're obviously going to lie. So it's been a real difficult thing to kind of navigate. I guess the way I've got a story coming out tomorrow, so our time tomorrow is Masa Amini's anniversary. And the way we sort of got around that was we looked at what Raisi recently said in relation to the protests, and basically he said they'll crack down further on anyone in Iran who protests against them. So we included sort of a line of that instead of me going to the embassy and saying, give us a right of reply. One thing I've also noticed it's been a real shift in reporting, not just within the ABC, but generally, is, yes, I'm getting the time call, is that there's been attempts to get people who are actually speaking on behalf of the Iranian people. So, you know, if we put someone up to explain something that's happened in Iran, or to, you know, tell us that they're actually representing the Iranian people, and they're not someone who's you know, not representative. The only advice I can have for people, I know it's really, really tough when you're in Iran and it's scary, and why would you really want to talk to some journalist in Australia about your plight? But if you do want to tell your story, you know, I'm on all the platforms, but also Signal, WhatsApp, whatever way, please get in touch. You know, we want to tell more stories about the human rights abuses, and we hope by telling them that inevitably the people do realise their desire for freedom and their calls for a secular democracy.
So thank you so much. You mentioned the interview with Prince Reza Pahlavi. In the reactions that you've seen since that type of reporting, and when was that? Can you remind us when that interview was?
That I think the interview was in January, and I ran the story sometime in February, so it was early this year.
Okay, so how much do you think things have changed? And since you've interviewed him once, do you feel like that's a beat, so to speak, that you should keep? Or do you think that because you've interviewed one very prominent figure in the opposition, then you need to cover others? Or I'm sure that you've got a lot of feedback. Do you feel like you need to do a follow-up? How do you once you do something that big, how do you kind of follow through?
Yeah, I mean, for me it was a pretty massive thing. I mean, he didn't know who I was. There were no, you know, he had no idea what I was going to ask him. So I was just some journalist in Australia that wanted to do an interview that happened to be from a, you know, Persian background. So it was a pretty big deal that he agreed to do that with us. I haven't kind of gone for any follow-ups, but I think I have tried in my reporting to look at other voices in the opposition movement. So I've mentioned Masih Alinejad, Nazanin Boniadi, and any others that, you know, are willing to talk to me. I think it's been really interesting in the past year. We sort of had this moment, remember at that Georgetown event, that's around when I ran the story, I think it was in February, we had this Georgetown event where they all sort of banded together, and there was a lot of hope that something would come out of this. And I think in the past year, maybe we've seen, I wouldn't say disunity, but it hasn't, it's like that's been fractured a bit, and sometimes we get lost on what the ultimate aim is here, or what the ultimate desire of the Iranian people, I should say, is, which is to have freedom. And I think the way I come at it is great. If the Crown Prince, exiled Crown Prince, would like to talk to me again, fantastic. But I really just want to talk to voices that are you know, involved in this opposition movement, and that are helping the Iranian people in their desire for a secular democracy. I mean, that is really what's driving this. I'm not a monarchist. I'm not, you know, I'm not any linked to any group. For me, it's really about that thing, that their desire for freedom.
Thank you so much. And I have noticed that your written pieces are long and they're probing and they're deep. And I know that that takes extra effort and it is much appreciated. Nahayat Tizhoosh, as I mentioned when introducing you, your interview with Toomaj Salehi was really historic in my eyes, and look forward to everything you have to say.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you for the invitation. Hi to all. I know you all from a distance, so nice to see you all on this call. I did make myself a few notes so I wouldn't go over time. So, and Mariam, thank you for the insightful questions. I do think the role of media does need to really be at the forefront of conversations when it pertains to Iran, because I think we do bear an incredible responsibility. So, you know, for me as a political journalist, or even journalists at large, we have a few responsibilities. And the primary goal, I think, is to tell untold stories. So to be the voice of the voiceless. And of course, part of that is to hold politicians accountable. So if we look at the past year and start with the most obvious stories, or at least what should be one of the most obvious stories, it's obviously that of human rights abuses. And so in comparison to previous years, I would say Western media in particular has made a bit of a leap forward in its coverage in terms of just the sheer amount of coverage. So multiple networks have obviously done original journalism and investigative reporting and digging deep into specific parts of Iran to show and expose the crimes that are being committed at the hands of the regime. And like Mr. Parpanchi said, it's not just a way to inform the public, but it is also a way to document these abuses should there ever in the future be a trial, be a tribunal, you know, be any kind of prosecution. Those kinds of stories are extremely, extremely valuable. So, you know, for us focusing on covering stories or of what we would call gomnam prisoners, those who are unknown, I think is one instance where journalism can not only report stories, but in also doing so show the authorities that they too are being held accountable. And so in the court of opinion, at least. So in my own personal reporting on Iran, there have been a few stories that have been impactful. I usually shy away from talking about myself, so I don't really like to do that. But I would say one major example was our investigation into the connection between 3 Iranian businessmen in Canada and the money trail between them and the purchase of oil tankers on behalf of the regime in Iran, obviously illegally. So Canadians really responded to that story because it was not something that was at all on their radar. It's the notion of people living freely in a Western democracy and yet having ties to a corrupt, criminal, brutal regime, and benefiting and servicing that regime is something that's completely foreign. Of course, the diaspora has been making these allegations for many years, but proving it in individual cases as a journalist with the necessary, responsible, and multiple sourcing that it requires is a major task. So I would say that was definitely one particular story. Early in the movement, obviously, there was the push to list the IRGC as a terrorist entity, and we did a lot of coverage of why politicians in Canada, or some politicians, are hesitant to do so, and that kind of, in a way, seemingly pushed the government to do something. It looked like they met the diaspora halfway, probably didn't go as far as the diaspora would have liked or would like, but there you have it. In terms of other stories, I think anytime you can do original journalism on Iran, it's often really well received and necessary. We have a lot of stories that are, you know, repeated in the media, especially over the last, let's say, decade or even since 2009. So as journalists, particularly in Western media, we need to diversify the kinds of stories that we're telling and how we are presenting Iranian people in the court of public opinion, I would say. So obviously my conversation with Toomaj and the introduction to him was quite significant. And I would actually say even for an Iranian audience, there were plenty of Iranians who reached out to me who had never heard of his music or thought he was connected to the regime and had no idea that he was inside Iran. So it also was successful in that way. Which kind of leads me to the next point of Persian language social media. So obviously there are immense risks there, which is why double, triple sourcing is immensely crucial. But, you know, when it's not possible, you simply need to rely on your own judgment or the editorial guidance of whichever team is around you, if there is one. In my case, social media has been fantastic. I tend to tune out the noise and just try to connect with as many people inside Iran as possible and really build that network. And that takes time. That takes, you know, people trusting you and really building those bridges, but it really pays off, and it's hugely important. So when it comes to covering the opposition, it's an extremely difficult task. And I think even the most seasoned reporters can run into complexities and nuances that perhaps, you know, on the surface may not seem important. But I would say the most important thing there, if you're a young journalist, is to just be educated about Iran, not just modern Iran, but what was before the revolution, what led to the revolution, what came immediately after, because I think there are a lot of historical misconceptions that get perpetuated. So that's my piece of advice for any young up and coming journalists. But in terms of staying neutral and balanced as a journalist, I think that is without a doubt the first and foremost criteria of being a good journalist. I might have to disagree with Mr. Parpanchi respectfully on that point of, you know, not worrying about neutrality. Unfortunately, when you work in Western media, it's not a luxury you have not to reach out to the other side, as we want to call it. And I would, you know, just draw a little bit of a distinction between a climate denier or somebody who, as Mr. Parpanchi said, is a gay basher. They are not in office. They don't hold authority over people. And so I think if any regime member would like to talk to me, I would love to talk to them. They are obviously not keen to do so, but I'd be happy to, and I've tried multiple times, but have not succeeded so far. So I do think there's a way to go about that. Of course, not every story needs to necessarily have a voice of the regime, but you do have to try as a journalist, even if it's just to expose the complete detachment and cruelty of the regime in those cases. So, and sort of to finish, I think we have a lot of activists outside of Iran who take on the task of not being neutral, and that is their right, and they should. But I do think we need more Iranian journalists who work in Western media. And this is a very, very crucial point, because I've seen it myself over the last 14 years that it's an extremely heavy burden to carry when you're perhaps one of the very few inside a big media organization, and every department is coming after you because you are the lone Iranian reporter and you have to file on, you know, every single story and be an expert on everything and do every little thing from translating to covering to analysis. And Nassim can probably relate a little bit on that point. Just to finish off, for citizen journalists, I would say they need to also, as much as we can try to find them, they also need to really read as much as they can about particularly what reporters are writing and how they're writing about Iran, and try to create connections with those reporters they trust. And be familiar with their way of narrating stories about Iran and how they are presenting Iranian stories, whether it's JCPOA, whether it's any other story, the IRGC, the listing, all of those tricky stories that we're all familiar with, how those are being presented, and ask around and see who's reliable, who's trustworthy. I've heard a lot of stories personally about citizen journalists and you know, people inside Iran being disillusioned whenever they connected with people in the Western media. And I think obviously we can do a better job all around to create that trust, but just for them, that if they are looking to connect with people, just to do a bit more reading of the writing that's being done, and then proceed cautiously. But that's it.
Thank you, Nahayat. I have a few comments on based on what you said, really, if you don't mind. And of course, you can speak more to what I'm going to say. I really agree that when you bring the other side into the equation, the regime side, it actually makes it worse even for the regime. When you have the comment back or the response that is being made, if you can get reactions from them, it gets at the truth even more. I have one personal experience with this of many years of advocating and organizing. I had one chance to, often when we're invited on TV programs, there's somebody who comes on from Tehran and they are a so-called analyst or professor, but really, we know that these are the people that have been selected by the regime and given permission to promote the regime line. But one time I had the chance to debate Massoumeh Ebtekar on Al Hurra, and maybe it's emotional, but I don't think it's just emotional. I think it's the one that I value the most, because it was like, okay, let's really get at the issues, and you're hearing from the horse's mouth. Very important what you said about journalists avoiding. Maybe it's because journalists, I mean, it's no secret what I think, for example, about the New York Times and how they've maintained access and maintained correspondence inside the country. They avoid talking about, for example, I mean, even on a topic as obvious as women's rights, they will write about the changes in law and the changes in status, and they will make a line at the revolution. They won't talk about, in an article about women's rights, what the rights were before the revolution. I mean, this is a gift to the regime. In terms of building trust with people inside the country, what you say is very important. It's unfortunate that because of over 4 decades of living under totalitarianism, a lot of activists, even the most democratically minded activists I have found in my years, particularly at Tavana, I was co-director and co-founder of Tavana for 10 years, that they build trust with somebody when the journalist expresses the opinion that they have. This is the trust building that they're used to, unfortunately. They want to hear from the journalists negative things about the regime, then that opens the door to them sharing. And it is going to take, and we've at Tavana, we've done work on this, about there's a difference between professional, neutral, impartial journalism and journalism that it is going to repeat verbatim what civil society wants to hear. So I didn't expect to comment, but your presentation really got me thinking. Do you have questions for each other? I think that you're in the same professional world, and I think there's a lot of respect across every angle. And you have, I think, I tried to bring in people to this panel who are doing the journalism on Iran, but in different ways. So we have TV, we have diaspora media, we have print journalism at global outlets. So maybe if you have questions for each other, we can start there.
Mariam, may I just make one comment about neutrality? I think it's most important for journalists, for readers, to really trust us and know where we're coming from. When Kayhan London started, they used to give us a label that you're a monarchist. I mean, that was one of the things that they would give us a label to bring us down. But I think as journalism has progressed, even the media you see in the United States, for example, they all have a line. And it's most important to have your line. And our line is about the people. It is for them to be able to choose their own form of government. Certainly, our history goes back to 1942, And Iranian history, it's like 5,000 years of monarchy, kingship. So we cannot say we're nothing, or this is something that we reflect our history, our identity. But most important than that is that we're sincere and forthright. And when they come to us, they know that we're not hiding something. So that's very important, because there is no such thing. I do appreciate what Nassim and Nahayat are talking about. And as a journalist, you have to be able to maintain that balance. For us, it's very easy because, we go through, the journals in Iran, the news agencies in Iran, and we come up with an opinion. So we've got both sides. But most important than anything is for your audience to trust you and to see you as who you are, not to hide away from it. I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazenin John. Sorry, I was muted. Thank you. Others?
Can I mention something, if possible? Yeah, I mean, both Nahayat and Nassim mentioned that in Western media, it's important to be neutral and have the other side's story. I mean, you both know that I have worked for BBC for 15 years, and probably BBC, maybe if not the best, maybe one of the best news organizations around the world, and it's a public broadcaster, so they have to be neutral. So I am familiar with the concept of being neutral, and but my point was not that you should ignore the other sides of story, but the point is that, I mean, Nahayat mentioned that I will interview anybody from the Islamic Republic officials if they are happy to give me an interview. Absolutely fine. I mean, I have no issue with that. But they will not do that, Nahayat. They won't give you an interview. But they will happily give interview to a U.S. news outlet. In fact, one of them is right now in Iran. If I was a Western journalist, because you mentioned that, about Western journalism, the criteria and everything, I am aware of all those criteria. But the question is here that when journalists like Nilufar Hamedi, Elahe Mohammadi, they are in prisons, right? An Iranian president, Mr. Ibrahim Raisi, wants to give an interview. Do they really need to import journalists from United States to give an interview to them? I'm sorry, somebody called me, my apologies. So for giving an interview, they don't need to import journalists from the other side of the world. If they are doing it, that means, to me, it's not journalism, to be honest with you. It's propaganda, and the news outlet that I don't want to name right now is in Iran. They are just being part of the propaganda of the Islamic Republic. If they were managed to shed light on anything that Iranian government didn't want it to happen, they wouldn't allow them to go there. They are allowed to go there because they know what's going to be based. They are controlled 100%. I remember like 10 years ago, 10, 15, I don't remember, when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was still in office. You may remember Channel 4 of Britain was there. I mean, was in Iran like every couple of months, like every 3-4 months. Nazanin would know better than me. Jon Snow used to go there for a week, staying in Tehran and reporting directly from Tehran, live from Tehran. And then Channel 4 would broadcast Ahmadinejad's Christmas message, for instance, along with Queen's Christmas message. I remember in Suez, there was a panel and Jon Snow was there, and somebody asked him that, how come you can go to Iran? What is the kind of relationship that you have with them? He said, they whistle and we go. It's not our choice. whenever they allow us, they call us and we go there. So whenever they allow us means whenever they need us, and you go there to help them. And I don't think this is journalism, to be honest with you. And just to make one more short point is that journalism, like any other product, needs a climate, an ecosystem to be able to flourish. You can't grow banana everywhere. I mean, bananas won't grow in, I don't know, in Alaska, for instance, because it needs certain climate to grow. Journalism is exactly the same, and interviewing is a form of journalism, and that only has a meaning when the other parameters and the climate is suitable for it. To make it clear is that when you are interviewing, let's say, Prime Minister of, for instance, or I don't know, President of the United States or any other official, if they lie, then they will be held accountable for it. They cannot lie. I mean, they can, we know that they do, but then they pay the price. But you can go, I mean, he wouldn't give you an interview, but any other US journalist can go and interview Ibrahim Raisi, and he will say whatever he wants. No accountability, no nothing, zero responsibility for him. He can say whatever he wants. You are basically becoming, sorry, not you, the journalist who is doing it is just becoming a tool in his hands to allow him to connect to the US audience and say whatever he wants. Sorry, Mariam, I will stop here.
I definitely, Nahayat is going to respond.
Yeah, I'd like to respond.
Yeah, plenty of time to respond. But it's in the way that you do it. For example, we have seen how women journalists working for outlets that are controlled by China, for example, Communist Party of China, will even put on a hijab and to interview, oh, I'm so glad I forgot his name, Jawad Zarif, in New York. Well, there's nothing preventing a journalist in New York from not wearing the hijab and asking Jawad Zarif very tough questions and putting him on the spot. That's a choice. That's the difference between professional integrity and a lack of professional integrity. The difference isn't between interviewing him or not interviewing him. Going back to what I said, I used to, for example, go on BBC Persian. I've stopped doing that, but when I did, I would be put up against a person who's a so-called, expert on X, Y, and Z from inside the country. And what the person would do is give the regime line in a way that seemed like independent somehow, coded. Of course, people inside Iran are very good at understanding these games. And then immediately after the interview on BBC Persian, there would be a campaign against me online from the person that was just on TV with. So these are the problems with, and I agree. It goes back to what you say, actually, Mr. Parpanchi, that the environment has to be right. When we bring, when media outlets bring on people from inside the country, but those people are known over and over again in their interviews to echo the regime line, then it actually pollutes it pollutes the environment. It doesn't create an environment of trust and truth. But you're welcome to respond now or after Nahayat. Nahayat, do you want to go ahead? You're muted.
Yeah, I think there's just a few distinctions here, right? Like when we talk about these live interviews where individuals from inside Iran come on and pretend to be independent. I think when you are booking those interviews, if you are not able to be transparent about who the individual is, what their connections or supposed ties are to the regime, I personally would not put them on the air. If I have any question about their motivation, I will not put them on the air. So there's a fine line between putting on so-called experts who spew propaganda, as Mr. Parpanchi said, and then there's a difference between the professional and moral aspect of what you as an individual, as a journalist, feel you need to do in order to be completely transparent and do justice to each story that you do. So for me, if I am covering a story, I will always try to get a response from the regime, and I will not get it, but I can say that I tried. And that in itself is powerful. That, look, we tried numerous times to reach out to the regime. They don't want to talk to us. That in itself speaks volumes. So, of course, I'm under no illusion to think that they might want to one day speak with me. That's clear. I've been trying for 14 years. That's never going to happen. And also, by no means of the imagination was I trying to lecture Mr. Parpanchi on what journalism means or what working in the Western media means. I was just generally speaking because I have not worked in Iranian language media. And so the experience I have and likely will continue to have is that of a rigorous editorial process with which Mr. Parpanchi is familiar with, and which will not allow you to do stories without fulfilling that basic principle of journalism. And you can do so and still be fair to the Iranian people and cover their voices and be transparent. And it's a fine, delicate balance. You are not saying, I'm going to give the entire piece to, let's say, so-called reformists inside the country. You don't need to do that. But there's a way that you can show, listen, like, we're trying to hold them accountable from a distance. It's not working, but we tried. And I think that goes a long way to what Nazanin was saying about creating trust also for the audience, right? Like, we're not looking biased, that we are, and perhaps we can have that discussion about the morality of being a journalist and whether you are a biased individual if you are, you know, siding with individuals who are getting murdered, raped, and tortured. We can have that discussion separately. But I think there's a way to go about it in a responsible, transparent way where you are not falling into the trap of propaganda. I don't think I've ever produced a piece that fell into that, and I don't plan on doing so in the future. So.
Nahayat, can I just ask, who do you go to get a right of reply? Like, I go to the embassy. Well, when I have gone to the embassy, I don't always go.
Yeah. So
on pieces where I have, they just ignore me. So who do you reach out to?
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that is there is no more embassy in Canada. So the job for us is double because there hasn't been an embassy since Stephen Harper days. So I tend to go to the next best thing. I go to, you know, any kind of embassy that's nearby or is connected to the story that I'm covering. I try to go to the UN. And depending on the story, like when we were doing massive reporting on PS 752, which obviously had a very, very heavy Canadian angle, I spent days and days trying to get Minister Zarif. And he was opening my emails, but not responding, not replying. Well, he replied technically, indirectly on Twitter, but so it really depends on the story. But your route and the avenue that you're pursuing, of course, is the right way. I would only reach out to regime officials. I would not go to someone who may be indirectly tied to for any kind of reaction. So I think the route that you're pursuing is obviously the right one, and it's a challenge.
And I assume you mean, so I'll go to them if I have a specific allegation, right? But I won't go to them if I'm just doing a feature piece, kind of talking about general stuff.
Exactly.
So you're talking about when you've had very specific allegations to put to them, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when we covered the story about, you know, the secret audio that purported to be Zarif's voice talking about PS 752, when we did that exclusive, of course, we're going to have to go to Zarif. We're going to have to try and get someone from the government or the regime, and we cannot do the story. That's that, right? So really depending on the angle of the story, but like you said, not every human rights story has to have a regime response. Of course not. I did a huge story about the crackdown on Kurds in Iran. I don't think I reached out to the regime on that. I think I reached out to the Sepa Pasaran in that particular region and tried to get an answer on a specific individual. And of course, I did not get an answer. But, you know, that's as far as I went on that. So.
Right. Unless there's any other comment at this point on this issue, I want to ask a last question to all of you going forward, because I think the 1-year mark is a real demarcation. What is your top priority for covering Iran? If you can speak to it in terms of theme, in terms of area of focus. What do you think is the most important thing that you can be covering? Let's start with Nazenin Ansari. You're muted.
Okay, well, we cover all aspects of Iran. You know, I mean, what I do is very different from what Nahayat and Nassim are doing. You know, we cover economy, we cover society, we cover opposition politics. Certainly, we cover economy is the major thing at the moment because it's in a free fall. And also, we cover individual heroism, individual initiatives, group initiatives that are making a positive mark in any kind of an environment. You know, role models, positive role models. That's one of the things that we've always done ever since it's a tradition in Kayhan to document events, to bring out the weaknesses of the regime and what it is doing wrong, to also show real positive role models and what people are doing to bring about positive change in their lives in Iran. And I think, you know, we are very, very, you know, what the people, I mean, you know, the sun and lion flag, we had been covering it. I mean, it has been our national flag forever, but it's only recently that everybody is now back to the sun and lion flag. So it's a positive thing for Kayhan to have been able, you know, we've always covered, I think it was Nassim or Nahayat, one of them were to give the voice to the voiceless. And certainly we've used these outlets to give the voice to the voices that were not being heard elsewhere. Specifically, you mentioned BBC Persian. You know, those voices that would never get on BBC Persian. So at least they would be heard through our pages. So, and this is what we're going to continue doing. And speaking about BBC, if I may just add, you know, I've worked with a lot of journalists, with a lot of investigative journalists. And one of the top ones was Sue Lloyd-Roberts, who worked for BBC News and BBC Newsnight. And she had covered the Taliban, she had gone to Chechnya, and she decided to go to Iran. And this is back in 2000. And it's right before, you know, the invasion, you know, the fall of Saddam. So she goes to Iran, and we decide, okay, what is the story that she's going to cover? It wasn't going to be politics. It was going to be social stories about young girls, you know, prostitutes, about AIDS, about drug addiction. And she covered them all. But then she was arrested in Iran. She was arrested in Iran with her producer, and she couldn't get out, but she managed to bring out you know, she was an investigative journalist, so she managed to bring out the videos. What's interesting, although it was shown on BBC Newsnight, because she had gone there for Newsnight, it was supposed to be shown on BBC World, and BBC World didn't show it. Because why didn't they show it? It's because they had their listening post. It was right before, you know, the fall of Saddam. They had the listening posts in Iran, and they didn't want to lose that. Access is very important for international media.
It's actually even worse than that for BBC, because BBC World signed a letter of agreement with the regime about what it would and wouldn't cover when it sent a journalist in. I think this was 5 years ago, and the letter was leaked. Okay.
But it is culture. Any journalist wanting to go to Iran, they need to get a permit for the Ministry of Culture and Guidance. And they're given, you know, guides and they're told where to go and where not to go. The reason Sue was arrested was that she didn't abide by those rules. And this is the way of reporting in Iran. You cannot get away from it. I mean, we need to be open. The thing is, international media, every time they file a story out of Iran, they need to be open about the parameters. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Parpanchi.
The question was, what is the most important thing that we...
Yeah, I mean, of course, overseeing all of Iran international news coverage, and the news is the news. It's everything that happens. But in terms of what you think, is there an issue area that you think really needs to be paramount moving forward after this 1-year anniversary?
I mean, like you said, we are a 24/7 news channel with, you know, news, a bulletin top of every hour. So we play by ear.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, of course, we will report that. But in the meantime, we pause sometimes and just to reflect back. And for instance, in Mahsa's anniversary, we have some documentaries which will start airing from tomorrow. We will cover all the demonstrations and everything live, but in the meantime, we have been working for a couple of months on some investigative reports and also documentaries which will go on there. We don't have any specific agenda, if you like, to be perfectly honest with you. We try to give people what they want. Of course, a journalistic product, but and I think that has been one of the reasons that we were kind of probably successful in terms of having audience who, I hope they trust us, because having an audience doesn't necessarily mean that they trust you if they are listening to you. But I hope they do, because we have tried to give them what they want. We didn't have an agenda. We never intended to push anything that we thought is better for the people, if that makes sense. But yes, I mean, like I said, we have been working on many documentaries which will air next week, and we will also focus. We have been planning for a long time to cover all the live events that will start happening from tomorrow morning.
Thank you so much. Nassim Khadem.
For me, I think, and this is the piece I've kind of written tomorrow, goes into this. I think 1 year on from Mahsa Amini's death, we kind of forget this was a revolution that was led by women, and I think that's what's made it so different this time. But what's happened in the aftermath in the past year is the government's doubled down on its efforts to crack down on the women. They're trying to now bring this new hijab law. They're, you know, stopping women who don't cover in hospitals, in schools, in businesses from being able to just do their jobs. You know, they're confiscating cars. They're getting other people to police it. They're using cyberspace to police it. So I think that those stories need to continue to be told. The stories of, you know, basically the grave human rights abuses that continue to happen 1 year on since, you know, the uprising began. And, you know, as I said at the beginning, I think, I just feel like there's something, I mean, I've reported on previous uprisings, but I feel like there's something different this time. And I think something in Iran has shifted, but also something in the diaspora has shifted, which is, you know, maybe why we're all sitting here chatting to each other today. There is a real mobilized diaspora and more interest in Iran, I think, than there's ever been. And we shouldn't give up on the Iranian people. You know, they need us to continue to report what's going on there.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. Nahayat.
I think Nassim is right about this shift that we're all seeing and observing, of course. I'm very keen to see and also observe what the next phase of this movement will be, particularly when you have some of the brightest minds that are being, rounded up and put behind prison walls. It seemed like last year there was sort of the spark that was going to start political conversations as soon as people had united under the notion that, okay, no more reform, we all want the regime gone. And so that was going to be the birth of perhaps constructive dialogue for the first time in 44 years. And I'm just, hoping to follow that thread over the next months and perhaps years of the dialogue inside Iran within intellectuals who are still remaining outside, the youth, whether there will be some kind of brain drain of youth becoming completely disillusioned with this, revolutionary moment not materializing immediately, and just sort of, the next stage. And then, of course, there's, interest in regime connections in Western countries and whatnot. So that's sort of the things that I'll probably focus on, alongside, of course, the continuing human rights abuses, which we all are, of course, anticipating, like Nassim said. But yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I'll be following your work. Very grateful to all four of you. Thank you for joining us, especially when you're so busy. And thanks to everyone who's been watching this program. Thank you.